Hey guys, let's talk about a murderer by the name of Edward Theodore Gein, or in short, Ed Gein, or also known as the Butcher of Plainfield. Ed Gein, with an IQ of 106, was born on August 27, 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Before I get into his crimes, I will begin with his childhood so we could see how he was like when he was younger, and the first red flags that popped up and that brought him to the way he was at the time of his crimes. Augusta, his mother, was very religious, very Lutheran, very suffocating. She ruled the home with an iron fist due to her stern, conservative outlook on life. She would frequently preach about sin, carnal desire, and lust to little Ed and his brother Henry. The father, George, was a hardcore alcoholic, and Augusta hated this man. But since she is very religious, she cannot divorce him because that goes against all of her beliefs. I could never. I'm really glad I was not born in the early 1900s because reasons. But anyway, knowing Augusta, Ed really could not, explore himself. I say this because at age 12 in 1918, Ed was caught masturbating in the bathtub and she grabbed his cherries and called them the, quote, curse of man, end quote. I just kind of threw this fact in because why not? Augusta believed that all women, herself excluded, because of course she would, were prostitutes and instruments of the devil. Ironically, she did want a daughter, but maybe that's her way of wanting to mold up the quote-unquote perfect woman in her conservative image. Gein tried to always make his mother happy, but she was very rarely pleased with her children. She often abused them with the belief that they were destined to become failures like their father, which, by the way, is setting up your children to fail. Regardless of the abuse from his mother, Ed still idolized his mother for whatever messed up reason. And speaking of abuse, Ed's father, in a drunken state, would beat Ed's head until his ears started ringing, which gave him a head injury. And surprise, surprise, this is very common among serial killers, because I guess messing up part of the region of the brain could make you think some things and make you do things that a normal human being would not, if you catch my drift. At age 7 in 1913, Ed witnesses his parents slaughter a hog in the shed behind the family store. Now, you would think that this would be very traumatizing to see, and as a child, you would be absolutely horrified. You would be screaming, crying, running away. Oh my God, that's me. But not little Gein. He experienced an ejaculation upon viewing this, which is very disturbing and very much a red flag. We could tell that Ed is a very sexual person, even at this young age, which is very alarming. Lust is something Augusta absolutely preaches against, yet Ed does this type of stuff. And yeah. Her suppression makes him more curious, and I really don't know how to properly articulate this thought, this point, but I'm sure you kind of get what I mean. Younger Gein became a target for bullies. It did not help that he has a physical defect where he had a growth over his left eye and a speech defect due to a lesion on his tongue causing a lisp. Poor child. Classmates and teachers were called off-putting mannerisms such as random laughter, as if laughing at his own jokes. This is a clear sign of schizophrenia. He was even diagnosed with this condition in his adult life after his heinous crimes. So obviously, he suffered from this condition since childhood, and it was left untreated his entire life. To make matters worse, his mother scolded him whenever he tried to make friends. She made him into an outcast. Some people are just not meant to be parents. Despite his poor social development, he did fairly well in school, especially in reading. In 1940, when Ed was 34 and still lived at home, his father has died. George died of pneumonic fluid in the lungs at age 66. Augusta attributed his death to being weak and would often say that he will be going to hell. Great wife, great mother, great person. Sarcasm, guys. Gein and his brother Henry were attempting to pick up the slack left by their complacent father after he died. The brothers worked a variety of odd jobs to make ends meet and support their mother, or else they'll face her wrath. Fun fact, Ed was employed as a babysitter very often. He loved to hang out with kids because they were easier to relate to, and that says a lot. Remember, guys, as a child, he was very socially underdeveloped, which also traveled to his adulthood. So children is a demographic he is more comfortable being in the company of. In about 1944, Henry started to challenge and criticize his mother's parenting and often thought her parenting was very unfair. He did not share the concept of worshiping his mother like Ed was, and Henry was worried about Ed's unhealthy attachment to her. The criticism of Augusta shocked and mortified Ed. May 16th, 1944. Henry died a sudden death under mysterious circumstances at age 43. Weird transition, right? Let me talk some more. Henry and Ed were fighting a runaway fire on the marshland near home, but unfortunately Henry died. Ed reported that he was unable to locate Henry. Well, he reported this to the police, that he was unable to locate Henry when they got separated during the chaotic fire. But then he led the police directly to where he lay dead. The apparent cause of death was not consistent with injuries from the fire. Henry's body had not been touched by the fire, and his head was even badly bruised. You guys see what I'm seeing? Because this is a crap ton of circumstantial evidence. However, county coroner listed Henry's death as asphyxiation, which basically means suffocation. Police dismissed the notion of foul play because, of course they would, because police are known for doing such great police work, right, guys? They did not believe that Ed was capable of killing someone, let alone his own blood, his own brother. A year after Henry died, 1945, Augusta started to become worried about Ed's reading, which included head shrinking, grave robbing, and many books on anatomy. So many red flags here, especially having the context that Ed most likely killed his own brother. The same year, on December 29th, Augusta died by stroke at the age of 67. This absolutely destroyed Ed. He kept his mother's room and the rooms she frequented untouched like a shrine, presumably in the effort to repress the fact she died. Meanwhile, the rest of the house was utterly neglected, with trash everywhere and piles of household items, furniture, and knickknacks collecting dust, in which they grew from small piles to insane mounds. After Augusta died, Ed was driven by intense loneliness to visit the cemetery where his mother was buried. He began to exhume corpses. The first body was his mother's, in which he twisted her head off with his bare hands and took it home to shrink it. What the actual fuck? Between the years 1947 to 1952, Ed made 40 visits to 3 local cemeteries to exhume recently buried bodies in a daze-like state. 30 of these visits, he said that he got out of this daze-like trance, left the cemetery, and returned home empty-handed. However, in 9 of the 40 visits, he dug up the graves of recently buried middle-aged women he thought resembled his mother and took the corpses home to express his anatomical curiosity on the bodies. He would cut off various body parts, participate in necrophilia, even though he denies it later on, and even make masks and accessories of their skin. He would wear them around the house, for instance, a belt made of nipples. Now, that is a concept and idea that would have never have crossed my mind no matter what state of mind I'm in. On top of all of this, Ed wanted a sex change and began to create a quote-unquote woman suit so he could pretend to be a woman. He loved his mother so much that he wanted to become her. In 1957, Ed caught the attention of the police after a hardware store owner by the name of Bernice Warden went missing. He was seen with her shortly before her disappearance, and when police entered the farm, they found her body. Buckle up, kitty cats, because this is going to be a lot. Huge trigger warning, because this description is very, very disturbing. Sheriff Schley and Deputy Warden saw Bernice's headless corpse found hanging upside down with her ankles lashed to a wooden cross beam. She was split open from her vagina to her sternum, which is the flat bone of the chest. Examiners of the house found some human DIY crafts. Police found 4 noses, 9 masks of human skin, bowls made from human skulls, a pair of lips, 9 vulvas in a shoebox, a belt made of nipples, a lampshade made out of a human face, and broken bones and fragments. This is just absolutely absurd, disgusting, disturbing, unsettling, nonsensical, vulgar, and other relevant synonyms that really express my distaste right now. An entire suit made of pieced-together skin of women that resembled his mother is paired with a vest of breasts attached to complete the look. They also discovered the head of Mary Hogan, a tavern operator who disappeared in 1954 on the property. Ed admitted to killing 2 women, both of whom resembled his mother, but pled not guilty by reason of insanity. In late 1957, he was deemed unfit for trial and was sent to various psychiatric institutions. In 1968, however, after it was determined that he could participate in his own defense, Ed was put on trial on November 14, 1968. He was found guilty of first-degree murder by Judge Robert H. Gallmar, but was deemed insane at the time of the murder. I mean, I don't think anybody in their right mind would do this. Psychiatrists interviewed Ed and diagnosed him with schizophrenia and being a quote-unquote sexual psychopath. He returned to a mental hospital where he remained until his last days. Ed was considered by many at the hospital to be a model patient, mild-mannered, and always helpful. I say this fact to humanize Ed because the fact that he was diagnosed and treated for his condition, he was able to not be a disturbing killer during his time at the mental hospital. Of course, there are guards, but I'm sure you kind of get what I mean, right? If only he was treated for his condition and had better parenting, better parents, his whole legacy would have never happened. It just sucks to know that Ed's life could have been very different and that his victims wouldn't be killed and used for such a sick purpose. I feel bad for the younger Ed, but I also want to clarify that I do not support or justify his disgusting actions and his disgusting crimes. On July 26, 1984, Ed died of respiratory failure due to cancer. The day after his death at 6 a.m., Ed was laid to rest next to his mother at Plainfield Cemetery. His gravesite was frequently vandalized until it was stolen altogether in 2000. It was later recovered in 2001. In short, Ed had a total of 7 victims consisting of 2 confessed victims and suspected of 5 more. The story of Ed Gein had a lasting impact on pop culture as evidenced by its numerous appearances in movies such as Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. And this concludes my true crime and art story. Have a good day, hydrate yourself, and make good choices. Ciao!